To this point in the series, I've been looking exclusively at creationist arguments regarding the theory of evolution, the claim that acceptance of evolution is just another form of religious faith, the question of why there are chimpanzees and gorillas in the world if humans evolved from lower apes, and the claim that evolution is just an unproven hypothesis. But in addition to disproving evolution, creationists also take upon themselves the much more daunting task of proving the existence of God. Now, the arguments used by creationists in this area aren't any fresher or more compelling than those used against evolution, and I'd like to examine a few of those. Starting with this one of creationism's all-time greatest hits. Whatever exists must have a cause. Since the universe exists, something must have caused it to exist. This is often called the cosmological argument, or the argument from first cause, and it actually predates Christianity, at least to the time of Plato and Aristotle, which might explain why it's so compelling to so many. After all, the question of where reality came from is understandably of some interest to quite a few of us, but the cosmological argument loses most of that potency when modern creationists insist that they know what that mysterious first cause was. And I know of no better example of this than William Lane Craig, of whom the cosmological argument is an old favorite.
The cosmological argument. The question of why anything at all exists is the most profound question of philosophy. Typically, atheists have answered this question by saying that the universe is just eternal and uncaused. But there are good reasons, both philosophically and scientifically, to think that the universe began to exist. Philosophically, the idea of an infinite past seems absurd. Just think about it. If the universe never began to exist, that means that the number of past events in the history of the universe is infinite. But mathematicians recognize that the existence of an actually infinite number of things leads to self-contradictions. But that entails that since past events are not just ideas, but are real, the number of past events must be finite. Therefore, the series of past events can't go back forever. Rather, the universe must have begun to exist. So why does the universe exist instead of just nothing? Where did it come from? There must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. Now, as the cause of space and time, this being must be an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial being of unfathomable power. Moreover, it must be personal as well. Why? Because the cause must be beyond space and time. Therefore, it cannot be physical or material. Now, there are only two kinds of things that fit that description. Either an abstract object, like numbers, or else a personal mind. But abstract objects can't cause anything. Therefore, it follows that the cause of the universe is a transcendent, intelligent mind. Thus, the cosmological argument gives us a personal creator of the universe.
He starts out relatively strong following the classical argument, and then sort of just collapses into a series of false dichotomies and non sequiturs. He claims that the first cause, the prime mover, what have you, must be omnipotent because it must have had the power to create the universe. He claims that it must be eternal because the universe is not eternal. And here's the biggest leap of all. He claims that it must be a personal God because only a personal God would have cared to create people like you and me and William Lane Craig. Craig's good at this. He presents his arguments with a confidence bordering on arrogance, as though every one of his conclusions follows naturally from his premises, and no intelligent person could ever possibly argue with any of this, so let's just stipulate to all of it and move on, shall we? Except, if you examine what Craig is actually saying, you start to realize that there's really no logic to any of it. If you want to make the argument that the universe must have had a first cause, I think that's a perfectly fine argument to make. It's a solid, respectable, philosophical position. But what we cannot do, at least at this point, is come to any solid, logical conclusions about the nature of that first cause based on the nature of the universe. Craig insists that God created the universe because only an omnipotent supernatural being could have. But he offers no support for this. He treats it as a foregone conclusion. It's not a foregone conclusion. You or I'm sure, could come up with many possible explanations for the origin of the universe that don't include a theistic, omnipotent God. Physicists, as it happens, have proposed many possible first causes, including the singularity from which our Big Bang erupted being an object in an older pre-existing universe. There's also the theory that the Big Bang resulted from the momentary collision at a quantum level of two prior parallel universes. Neither of those have been proven, and maybe they never will be. It's all conjecture. That's not the point. The point is there are many possible first causes for the universe other than a theistic, omnipotent God. Craig also suggests that the cause of the universe must be eternal because the universe itself we now know has a definite beginning point, the Big Bang. But again, this conclusion doesn't follow logically from the premise at all. And besides, those of us who argue in favor of science and reason always love it when creationists try to use this argument because it's so self-defeating. The work is already done for us. All together now, if God created the universe, who created God? The usual creationist answer is that nobody created God, that God is unique in being eternal. But if you're willing to argue for an eternal God, why not save a step and argue for an eternal universe? Now, we have every reason to believe that the universe is not eternal, that it had a definite beginning at the Big Bang. Again, that's not the point. The point is, philosophically, there's no difference between postulating an eternal God and an eternal universe. Actually, postulating an eternal universe is better. You save a step. A finite, linear universe does not imply an eternal, infinite God, no matter how badly William Lane Craig wants you to think it does. Finally, building on his first two unfounded premises, Craig claims that the immaterial, eternal God who created the universe must also be a personal God. His reasoning is that the physical, material universe could only have been created by something non-physical and immaterial. I'm not sure why he keeps insisting that the creator of space-time must be beyond all space and time rather than just beyond our particular space and time. But besides that, he's also setting up another bullshit dichotomy here. For the moment, let's grant him his proposition that the creator of the universe was non-physical and immaterial. How the hell can he say the same thing about a personal mind? My favorite Emily Dickinson poem, probably my favorite poem, period, is the one that goes, "The brain is wider than the sky. For put them side by side, the one the other will contain, with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ, if they do, as syllable from sound." You know what I love best about that poem? She says brain, where a lot of other writers might have said mind. It's not the mind that's wider than the sky, or deeper than the sea, or just the weight of God. It's the brain. The brain creates the mind. Everything about us that makes us who we are, both as a species and as individuals, originates in the brain. Consciousness, thought, feeling, memory. We don't yet understand everything about how these phenomena work, but it is accepted virtually universally that at their most fundamental level, they are physiological, that your thoughts, your feelings, your memories are the product of the functioning of your nervous system. The mind is not immaterial. The mind is just as material as every other part of you. the elementary particles that constitute the neurons and synapses that allow you to think and to feel and to experience the world and to remember and interpret those experiences are just the same as the particles of which every other speck of matter in the universe is made. The mind is physical. The mind is material. Suggesting otherwise might be the dumbest thing that Craig says. But even if we grant him that proposition, having already let him have the notion that the creator of the universe was immaterial, it still does absolutely nothing to prove that a personal God created the universe. The mind, any mind, wouldn't necessarily have the power to create the universe. To get to that point, we have to step aside yet a third time and grant Craig his premise that the conscious immaterial mind was also omnipotent. And I'm sorry, but that's more charity than I'm willing to give to a self-described professional philosopher who can't come up with a better argument than this.